Welcome to the Business Grind, where we give you an inside perspective on what it takes to start, build, and run a successful business. Here are your hosts, Danny Shaw and Sean Michael Wellington.
All right. Hello to everyone in podcast land today. Thanks for joining us. Sean, how are you feeling?
Feeling good and ready to go back to the book reviews. It's been a little bit since we done one.
Yeah, it has, right? We don't be reading no more. Nah, we be reading. We just be busy. All right. Yeah, so definitely getting back into the book reviews. So today's episode, we're going to discuss the book, Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun, which is written by Reginald F. Lewis, Hugh B. Price, and I believe some additional contributions from his daughter, right?
Yeah, and just something for me personally, it was like, so his name is Reginald F. Lewis, or the F was like Francis Lewis, and being from Queens, Francis Lewis, it just was like, it kind of made my ears perk. I was like, wait, his name is Francis Lewis? So that's like a block/neighborhood in Queens. So
okay, had to give a shout out to New York and your side of town.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. All right, so the book is about Reginald F. Lewis, and basically it chronicles his life, his work, his upbringings, his life, and ultimately his passing as well. In regards to a little bit of context on who Reginald F. Lewis is, he was an American businessman. He was one of the richest black men in the 1980s. He's been touted as being the first black American to build a $1 billion company, and he was listed on Forbes as being one of the 400 richest Americans in 1993, and ultimately his untimely passing in 1993 at the age of 50. So this book really just takes us through the journey of his upbringings, a lot of insight into his personal life, also insight into how he got into the business world and the deals that made him the wealthy man that he was today, that he was at the time, and then his passing and his legacy. All right.
Yeah. And they kind of go into some details as we get to the middle of the book about a little bit of the details of how he moved as a business person, how he was able to secure some of these deals and secure some of these acquisitions. So
okay, yeah. So indeed. So now that we've kind of set the stage on who this man was and what the book was about, let's get into it. So Sean, first out the gate, did you like the book?
So with all due respect, I'm gonna say no. It wasn't a book that I did. I mean, I liked some of it. I liked parts of it. But if I'm giving the overall critique of the book, the beginning was a little too slow for me. And when I mean slow, it didn't really get into the business lessons fast enough for me. It was it's very autobiographical, and I guess that's what this is. This is a business / biography. But just the beginning. I want to hear your opinion too, because I get why they told the story, right?
Right.
The first couple chapters was all about his upbringing, how his parents instilled certain things into him, and how he was a student athlete, and how athletics really played into his mentality, and it carried over into business. So I do understand the reason for it being there. It just felt very stretched out. So.
Yeah, I would agree with you in that regard. So for me, it was a good book. It wasn't my favorite business-related book. So for me, it kind of went into 3 cycles. So in the beginning, early on, for me, it was fine to get to know his background and his upbringing. But I do agree. To me, it felt like it dragged a bit. I was like, all right, I want to get into some of the other stuff. But I do understand why they laid it down. So for me, it was like the beginning of the book. Or let me not say the beginning because it was a lot in that first half, but it was 3 phases. Telling his upbringing and background, then you go and transition into, him leaving college and getting into the business world and being a lawyer and getting his feet wet there, and then his deals from there, and then ultimately the tail end towards his life. So the beginning of the book kind of drags for me. I got a little bit more invested during the transition of him being a lawyer, and then transitioning to be a businessman, and then some of those major deals that he closed that made him very famous and in the spotlight. And then towards the end, I got a little sad towards the end as it started talking about his health problems and complications that that he was dealing with towards the end. So yeah, so not my favorite good book, but wasn't, it took me through a lot of areas that I don't usually like when I'm reading a book, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think you made an interesting point because it sounds like you kind of got back in, and it sucked you back then a little bit when he started getting into the business world after he left college.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for me, it was actually him talking about being in Harvard. That
Mm.
was okay. That's interesting. Like, so his experience in Harvard, how he, him applying, him adjusting and acclimating to the campus and the community there, how he had to,
Mm-hmm.
like, the code switching of it all. Like, that kind of interested me a little bit. But
Mm-hmm.
yes, I would. But then it didn't pick up really until he started, making deals and closing deals. So.
Right. One thing I thought was interesting about the Harvard, his claim on, I'm saying it's a claim, but I'm assuming it sounded like it was true based by everybody's accounts. He technically did not apply to Harvard, right? He got in through like a program, but he didn't fill out an application, and he kind of just, got in, and he was very proud of that. He didn't have to like, go the traditional route of getting into Harvard and getting a degree from there. And that kind of stuck out to me because, I felt like that was something that he took pride in throughout the rest of his career. Not just saying, oh, I got into Harvard and, I didn't have to really apply, but just how his whole energy as a whole was really about making deals and how he could make things work for him regardless of the obstacles, right?
Yeah, he really didn't believe in any limitations. That was kind of his running theme, is like, yeah, that's just a construct. Like, that doesn't really, you're letting these things, whatever it is,
Right.
limit you.
You're letting these
So,
things, right? Like you're letting your race, or you dwelling on your race and the adversities take control of you. You're letting your lack of money or education, everything that most people would probably say they can't do because of these things. He would say, "Nah, we can get past that, right?"
yeah, that was really, if there was a theme of the book and like his philosophy, it was that, like, yeah, these are just obstacles, but they're not limitations you should accept. Yeah.
Which was funny. I thought was funny is because while he had that mentality, there was definitely points where he would get mad and frustrated and like, because of these same issues that he would tell other people not to focus on, right? Like he knew when he would get slighted for something because he was black, and that burnt him up. So it was also for me interesting to see how even sometimes it was hard for him to hold that same energy when it would happen, right? Like there's only so much he could do to before ultimately it would still get to him as well.
Yeah, for sure. And then, I mean, I don't know what kind of order we're going to go in. I don't want to skip around too much,
Oh, we
but
just go for it.
like his big deal was McCall. It was either McCall or was it the milk company? No, it was McCall. It was McCall.
Mm-hmm.
So his deal with McCall, he really, he presented himself as representing a group of investors because of his race, right? Though he did both things. He didn't let his race limit him, but he was aware that it is a limiter. So he presented himself as like, hey, I represent this group of people who want to buy this company, when it's really just him. But he knew that the perception would be different if he came by himself as an individual black man trying to buy this company. So yeah, just to kind of agree with what you said, he would get frustrated and he would act based on these construct of limitations, but he was still smart enough to know that whether they're real or not, I need to move in a way that I'm going to pass them. So.
Well, let me step back first before we get into the book. Have you been in a scenario like that where you had to present yourself in a different way or not reveal who you were, your true role in a certain business situation was?
I have not explicitly been in that situation, no. But I mean, I think I have the advantage of being 23 years past when he was trying to do it. Maybe more than that, actually, when you think about it, actually, because he was doing this in the early 80s, right? So 30 plus years later, where, it's a little more of it's a different world we live in than back then. So I see the necessity for what he did, but I can't say that I've had to do anything that explicitly to hide, who I am in a business deal.
Okay, fair enough. I would say I've never done it in the sense of to hide, my race or anything like that. But I definitely have been in scenarios where I may not you may not know I own the company, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily because I'm black or anything. Mainly because it's like, well, you don't need to know that. Like I'm working on behalf of the company, right? It doesn't. It's irrelevant if I own the company or not. I would feel like sometimes, especially early on, if they felt that I did own the business, then it'd be more nonsense I would have to deal with when it came to negotiation and stuff, right? Because it's like, oh, well, you can, I just always felt like that those type of scenarios would come about because they knew I was black, so I wasn't concerned about that. It was just more about what they thought the operating structure of the company would be.
Okay, yeah. So I guess in that regard, I have been in that scenario where it's like, well, I work in video for the most part, so they'll see me doing a task and not be aware that I'm actually, the owner of the company or running it. So yeah, that's true. I've been in that situation.
Okay, fair enough. All right, sounds good. All right, so then let's get into Mr. Lewis and his early dealings. So at first he was a lawyer, so he's recruited to work in a law firm right after law school, and he started his own firm shortly after, right? And then after being a corporate lawyer, I think about 10-15 years, he had his own practice. He moved to his own he switched gears and created a private equity firm, right?
Yeah.
And got more into acquiring businesses and so forth. And I think his first major deal was the one you spoke about, right? McCall Pattern Company.
Yeah, McCall Pattern Company, which was like so antiquated right now. So I feel like we got to explain what a pattern company is. It's basically like those sewing machine. People who used to use sewing machines, it would be the pattern for the dress or whatever the shape it is you're sewing. It's like a cutout, like a tracer, right?
Yeah. You got it.
So yeah.
Okay, fair. It's like, oh, we dating ourselves here, right?
Yeah, because I feel like people don't even know what a sewing machine is
right?
nowadays. So.
Right. That might listen. I've had a few of those moments this year where I'm thinking I've dated myself. I'm making reference to things that people are just looking at me like I'm crazy. So, all right. So yeah, home sewing pattern business, right? So he purchased it, and then I think so. This is not my area of deep knowledge and expertise, right? But he was able to negotiate the price down, and turn the company around by freeing up capital that was tied into fixed assets that the company owned, such as the building and machinery, and then also finding additional use for the machinery during downtime by using the company to manufacture greeting cards, right? And then he started recruiting managers from rival companies. So for people who may not be familiar with this type of strategy, I know a lot of times we talk about, starting your own business and creating your own business, or even investing in other businesses like through stocks and stuff. But we haven't really talked about, buying whole businesses and then finding value inside of those businesses, right? And Sean, feel free to jump in before I start going off a tangent and monopolizing this part of the conversation.
All right. Well, I mean, I do think that once we got to this section of the book, it reminded me a little bit of Built to Sell. We did a couple episodes back. Right. So it's not the exact same method because he purchased a company that was already established versus, starting a company and building to sell. But once he took over the company, he did like his goal. He did, strategically make it profitable and make it to a point where he could resell it and make a profit off of it, basically.
Right.
And I think what stood out to me, what was interesting, was his reasoning behind it, right? Because this was a company that he knew he could negotiate and buy for a good price because it's an industry that was shrinking. The sewing industry was shrinking overall. So, there's not much more growth for the industry. So people probably might be looking to sell. And he was smart enough to recognize that, but know that was the leader in that industry. So regardless of the industry shaking, that's still a leader out of the companies who operate in there. So there's still money to be made. So.
Right. And so I think a lot of times, and when we talk about freeing up capital or, creating more value within a company, sometimes it's for people who may not be familiar. It's like, well, how does that happen? How do you go in a company and start freeing up more capital and identify more value, right? And I think a lot of times it's like, well, these capital and things are, and these assets are already tied up to one thing, and you may not realize that you can get more value or an additional value if you can put it to multiple usage, right? So by using that manufacturing company, instead of just focusing on patterns, we know it's going to be a downturn or a downtime during certain seasons. Why not use these same machineries for additional uses that's going to still help make money, right? And owning the real estate and so forth. So, for instance, as an example, which always kind of amazes me, Macy's, right? Like the stock of Macy's, is usually, well, recently a lot of critique is, stock of Macy's is undervalued, right? And the reason why a lot of people feel that way is because even though Macy's does all this amazing business from sales, if they was to sell their real estate, if they just closed all their stores and just sold all the real estate or used all the real estate that they own for all the department stores that they have, that would unlock way more value and money on a year-to-year basis than these stores alone. Right. Now, obviously,
just based off the location of the real estate, just how they're in prime locations.
Just the location of the real estate and the fact that they own that, right? If they were to just shut down operations, right? Now, obviously, Macy's can't do that because it's too much going on, right? To just say we're going to shut it down and we're going to be a real estate company. But, that is in theory a way on how you say, well, how you kind of need to. In theory, that is a way on unlocking additional value from a company, right? So Macy's is valuable in itself just off the service and the stores that they sell this clothing from out of the department stores. But there's also a lot of unlocked value in their real estate, but they can't shut down and sell all their real estate to make a profit, right? So not the same extreme that happened here in Lewis's case, but it is an example of, hey, sometimes you have value that's just locked in and you can't unlock that value due to other reasons. But in this case, when he brought the sewing machine, he was able to unlock additional value in different parts of the business and operations. Yeah, but the Macy's insight, I've always found that a bit fascinating with him about that. So yeah. So moving on, sewing machine, figured out a way to unlock more value, multiple uses for the manufacturing company and facilities. Then he started exporting to China, new products, introducing new products. And, it led to the company being the most profitable it ever was, like in history of the company, right? And then, the real estate that the company already owned, retained the ownership of, he was able to sell it for a 90-1 return, right? Which obviously all the investors who invested in the company, they all turned a tremendous profit. 90-1 is nothing to sneeze at, right? Like 90-1 return, that's great, all right? So, and at the time, he owned about 80% of the 90 million of the deal, right? So obviously he was, quite wealthy and made off with a nice little check. But these type of business deals are more like, how would you call it? Not active investors, leverage buyouts, right? Or
that's a great way to put it. Yeah, leveraged buyout. Yeah.
Right, leveraged buyouts, acquisitions. Where essentially you go into companies and you buy companies to unlock the value that we were just talking about, unlock the hidden value in these companies that are not being maximized. And once you are able to maximize the value in these companies, you get it to a place of profitability and all of that good stuff, then you sell it now at a profit, and then you keep it moving. And that's a different art of business side of things that I know we don't really talk about because we're so used to talking about how to get capital for business. This is already within this type of deal. I'm not saying this with the knowledge that you already have money, because he definitely had to find ways on how to fund these deals, but they were a little bit more, can I say a little bit more sophisticated and complicated than the usual routes that we usually talk about in regards to like bootstrapping and crowdfunding and stuff like that, right?
Sophisticated, yeah, because he was dealing with investors and people with significant resources and significant capital. Like
Right.
he was a nickel and dime it, really. So
Right, right. And also even the way how these deals had to be structured, there was a lot like on the back end and legalities and just off the debt and the terms of the sales and when the money had to be there and X, Y, and Z. So definitely a bit more involved than our usual, hey, I'm gonna set up shop tomorrow and work on an MVP and see where it goes from there.
right, but there was that one friend. I don't know if he named him explicitly, but that gave him what was it like 700,000? Just like there was no paperwork, no nothing.
Yeah,
It was like
yeah,
I'll bring it back for you tomorrow. Like that.
yeah.
So there was a little bit of that, but
Listen,
that goes to show how much they trusted him. So.
listen, we all got those brown paper bag friends we can lean on every now and then, like.
That's a brown briefcase. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a brown duffel bag of friends. Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, so definitely that's how Lewis moved, right? He was more of a definitely trying to identify businesses where there was value, hidden value, maximizing it, and then, turning a nice return for him and his investors, right?
Yeah.
Okay. How do you feel about that style of business, Sean? Is that
I think it works for him and his personality type.
Uh-huh.
I think he kind of thrived off of just going in and making things happen. Right. He wasn't afraid to talk to anybody. He wasn't an introvert by any means. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So those kind of deals kind of lend itself towards his personality type. Now,
Right.
I don't think I can move the way he did.
Right.
But I do see like it is amazing to hear and read about how he was able to maneuver the way he was and how he's able to it was a lot about his presence. There's a lot of sentences and a lot of paragraphs about how he carried himself, how his demeanor was, how he had confidence, how he spoke up, things like that,
Right.
which I think is about why the title's named what it is. It's like, how do you operate in a world where around people where you've been told you're inferior to your whole life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you've been implied at least. So I thought that was interesting. So.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know me, it's not even that I'm risk averse because I'm fine with taking risks. I'm so debt averse that I don't even want any part of these type of deals here, right? Because it's really off the, you're leveraging a lot in the hopes that you can turn these companies around and get them to a point of profitability and sell it at a profit. And these are great efforts. I mean, what he did with that company was great. I mean, it is nothing. Kudos, right? I think for me, like you said about personality types, I'm like, I'm just thinking about everybody I would have to interact with to turn this company around. Similar to what's going on at a major tech company right about now. You know what I'm saying? And I don't think I would have it in me to have to do all of that and interact with all these managers and see what the culture is like and then try to shift the culture around as well. Because, you're not just saying, hey, I brought a company and let me make it profitable. You kind of got to see what makes this company tick. Why is it moving the way it is? Where can there be rooms for improvement? You're thinking about culture and just the mental and the ethic, the work ethic of the people that's already there, how they're going to respond to a new owner. There's a lot to take into consideration. So these aren't easy feats, to say the least, right?
Right. And then there was a chapter in the book where he discussed how he would just read prospectuses from other companies. What do you think about that? Because I think that, and then the fact that he worked on the other side of the financing side of things, I think those are two things that kind of gave him some confidence, because he was looking at all these other companies from both of those lenses and it's like, all right, they're not doing anything I can't do. I think that's his mentality.
Oh yeah, for sure. Listen, the stuff he was doing, the confidence, props, and you need that for sure. I think there has to be a certain level of confidence. Like, I'm confident in a lot of areas. I just don't have confidence when it comes to trying to convince 20 people that they need to be moving in a certain way, right?
Right.
And not only confident, I just don't want to. I think that's a bigger thing. I don't even want to be bothered with trying to do it, but for him to be, saying he read he was able to, because he came from the other side, he was able to see all angles and he did his research. I'm a big proponent of research. So the fact that he was reading perspectives and all of that information, yes, you need to, especially with these type of deals. This is not something you just go into without any research and insight, right? Like, so yes, please. That was very smart of him, very smart. And I think it's something that a lot of people should be doing. We should be doing our due diligence when it comes to any type of deal, right? Because even what you'll see is, even when you do your due diligence, there's still an opportunity for something to go wrong, as we will talk about in a bit, right? So
Yeah.
he had the right approach. Can't knock it. He had the right approach. He had the research. There was nothing that made him feel like he couldn't do it. And because there wasn't anything. There was nothing that, because he was just as smart as everybody else. He knew his stuff. So nothing. It was just a matter of executing and going, right?
Yep. It was almost like I don't want to call it second nature, but maybe like like autopilot a little bit, right? Because he is so used to the nuts and bolts of what he was doing.
Right,
So.
right, exactly. All right, cool. So then, that was a big win, and he got a lot of. I think I'm confusing my points in the book now, but I mean, he was already getting a lot of press in general, right? But I believe it was the Beatrice deal that really got him like his big worldwide, spotlight. Would you say? Would you agree?
Yes. Yeah. But what gave you that impression, you think?
That what he caught more attention for the Beatrice deal?
Yeah. Is it because of just the numbers,
I
or?
think the numbers. So and I might be confusing points in the book. I know early on when he was getting press, he didn't really like the press he was receiving. He was very, very conscious of the press he received, right?
Yeah, he was almost overly. Didn't he call
Yeah,
whatever publication and like yelled at them?
Yeah, he called a few reporters, a few journalists who wrote stories about him, and would, I don't want to say berate, but he would correct them on what they got wrong in the article about him and how they portrayed him and so forth. So he was definitely very conscious and aware of how he was depicted in the press and the media, right? And I mean, I will say he had some valid points in his annoyance and dislike on how the media portrayed him. That I will say. There was certain points that he had, and I was like, I don't disagree. But then there was also times I was like, I think we might be spending too much energy on this, right? Like, I don't think it's worth the battle, right? But he definitely didn't. He tended to not appreciate articles that focus exclusively on his race, right? And also articles that, I guess, downplayed his intelligence, right?
Or his involvement in a deal.
Yeah, if they tried to make it seem like he wasn't as involved as he knew he was, he didn't like that. He didn't want to be characterized as just a guy in the room or a side player who didn't put this together. And I think there was a few times, especially early on with some of his deals, where it was written in a manner where he didn't get his full credit for his role in these deals, and he did not like that. All right. Yeah, but I think it was the Beatrice deal, which that really, I think made him a billionaire and so forth, that really put him in the spotlight and really brought him to the forefront of businessmen, not just black business, but businessmen in general, because of how he put it all together and was able to execute it and the profit as well. And they go into depth in the book about how all of that came about, right?
Yeah, they specify how he structured that deal and all the steps that went into it.
Right. So I will say we're going to get into the details in a bit, but Sean, any just top level thoughts about that aspect and that part of the book?
I mean, the numbers were jarring, right? The amount he was working with,
right?
I mean, nah, not besides that. And then, well, there was the one little anecdote, and I hope I'm not confusing the two deals. But I remember at one point, it might have been McCall, but I'm pretty sure it was Beatrice, where he was watching TV and he saw Jesse Jackson on TV running for president, and he was like, "Well, if he could do that, I could do this." Like, I just thought that was funny. Like,
Right. So, okay, no. So yeah, there was a lot of things going on around this time with that deal. So for context to the audience, so Beatrice International Foods, it was, well, he brought Beatrice International Foods from Beatrice Companies for 985 million, right? And then he renamed it to International Holdings, and this is a snack, food, beverage, grocery store conglomerate, right? Now this company, as the name implies, was international. So you had facilities not just in the United States, you had them in Europe. There was, I think, France. They owned so many different. There was so many layers to this company and things, right? So the first aspect of it was just even figuring out the legalities of how this would happen, because the way he went about this deal, the intent was to buy the company, unlock the value in these different divisions of the companies in their respective countries, and then sell it at a profit, right? And then, as he was doing, and move on to the next deal or venture. Now, I think one of the biggest hurdles at first was just trying to figure out the financing part of it, right? Like, how does this deal get financed, and who he's working with, and which banker, right? And how to reduce the amount needed, because this was a leveraged buyout, right? Again, so leveraged buyout, you are a leveraged buyout is you're buying a company, but you're using the acquisition of another company, right? And you're using a large amount of borrowed money in order to finance this deal. So it's like, I don't have all this money right here, but I'm gonna get this money from my man's over here to buy this company. I'm gonna pay my man's back, which is kind of like most deals, but you're dealing on a higher scale, on a higher level, right? So
yeah, a lot higher.
Very high. And at these numbers, it's getting a little, it's getting real high up here, And on top of the financing aspect that had to be dealt with, you have to come up with, he also had to figure out the plan to sell off the assets at the same time that the takeover was happening, right? So if it's sounding complicated to you while I'm trying to explain it, definitely got complicated in the book, right? So it's like, I'm trying to buy this, but at the same time, while I'm trying to buy this, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to sell this when I buy it and break it up in order for the profits around the same time, and get this all synced up. And not just domestically, I'm trying to sync it up internationally, because there's international courts and international laws that have to be adhered to depending on the jurisdiction, right? And then on top of this deal, he was also getting pushback from the different divisions within this company, especially like in some of the European countries, right, Sean? Like, I know there was definitely some resistance on him buying the company as a whole, and some of the companies knew that he was going to try to sell, and so that he was getting resistance. It wasn't like everybody was all in to make this deal happen. So he was really trying to figure this all out and getting a lot of pushback along the way.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely pushback is the exact word.
Right. And also politics as well, I think, in the sense of, some of these companies, they knew their local laws, so they would like exercise certain things like right at the last minute, hoping he didn't have enough time to rectify it, and that, it wouldn't go through, because an issue in Italy doesn't mean that it's just an Italy issue. It means the whole deal doesn't go through, right?
Right.
So, He was dealing with a lot of hurdles to get that deal done, but not I won't say miraculously. I mean, the book goes into how much work he had to do to make it go through. So I think it would be
Yeah, it was persistence,
yeah,
really,
yeah,
because
yeah,
they were talking
yeah,
about starting the day at 3 a.m. and
yeah.
finishing up at 11, and then on weekends they take it easy and start at 9.
Right,
It's
right.
like, yeah, nah.
Yeah, so it would definitely be a bit short sighted to say somehow and luckily. Like, I mean, I don't. He was persistent. He was gonna get this deal done or die trying. That for sure. Like, and not to be morbid and foreshadowing, but definitely he was gonna make this deal happen, and he did. You're right. This deal is kind of the deal that I ain't say it like not your championship piece, but that's that's his I don't even want to say claim to fame, but that's definitely
The feather in his cap.
Yes,
maybe? I
yes,
don't know.
yes, yeah. It was the salute, like, here I did it, right? Like, the other deals was cool. I was making money over here, I was getting millions over there, but this was the deal right here. And very, very proud of that moment. He's very proud that he made that deal go through. It was kind of like, I've accomplished a lot, but this was like his proudest and biggest accomplishment to make it happen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, so then, it goes into these deals and, all the details that had to happen along the way and the trials and tribulations and the setbacks. And then the book also goes into a lot of his personal relationships, which I thought was very interesting. I will say for me, because I'm not really I'm not really, well, at least not at this point in my life. I'm not interested in doing leverage buyouts and buying companies and trying to unlock value and resell it. That's not where I'm at in my life right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I was interested in the personal relationships that he had with his people and people that he worked with and he grew up with. I thought that was interesting in just how he treated people. I didn't necessarily like it a lot of times, but it was interesting to see those dynamics. What'd you think about that, Sean?
I think it was the biggest thing I was interested in is, like, I mean, I guess I've kind of said it already, but his mentality, like what he thought when he would go into these situations. He was never, even though we seen him get frustrated, we seen him get angry, and we seen all kinds of emotions, but he was always calculated no matter what he did and how he acted, regardless of what he was feeling. So that was just, they have a specific little section where they talk about, all right, well, you need to be passionate. Excuse me. You need to be passionate in order to sell your idea and sell your project. But when it's time to execute and when it's time to, get it off the ground and work on things, you need to not be passionate. You need to be cold and calculating, really. So,
yeah, I'll definitely give you that. His persistence, definitely got to give kudos and admiration to. I did not like, he was, listen, you're not gonna beat him, right? Like, you're not beating him, this guy. The type of mentality he has, but totally gotta give props to. But I think the areas where I didn't necessarily like or take to was just the way he treated other people. Like barking on people or expecting things of certain people. Certain sacrifices he would come to expect from his staff and team members and stuff like that, and the way he would drive them. And to the point he drove away a few key people in his life, that he came up in the business with, right? And for me, I don't really. That's not my energy. That's not how I subscribe to things. I've had my own frustration with people I've worked with and people I brought on to help me with projects, and it just doesn't work for me personally to be that kind of way, right? I don't want to berate you 1 minute and then act like it didn't happen 5 minutes later.
That's hilarious because there was one story. I guess I like this book more than I let on in these little stories that entertained me. He had I forget which one of his business partners was, but for whatever reason he just went off on him.
Right.
They got in an argument, and Kevin was his name. I just remember his name was Kevin. I don't even remember what he did. But Kevin was about to slam the door, walk out. He's like, "Kevin, don't slam my door." He almost threatened him. He's like, "Kevin, don't slam my door." And Kevin didn't. He gently shut the door, but then he came back later and he actually apologized to him and said, "Well, your reaction must mean I'm doing something wrong, so I apologize." So like we talked about earlier, like we don't necessarily care for everything he did, but I think at the end of the day, he always realized that like, what is the goal? What are we trying to accomplish? And he realized that, well, whatever that disagreement was about, it was about solving it versus who wins and who loses. So
Yeah,
I thought
see,
that was interesting.
it's interesting, but that ain't for me. You know what I mean? Like the personality that he has, and that was shown in the book. Like I get it, and I think in some ways I can understand certain aspects, like working hard and being persistent and diligent. But there is those soft skills that I'm probably never gonna tap. That type of soft skills where you gotta just keep riding people to the point of like for the sake of what, for the sake of business. That's not really me, right? uh I was when I was reading this book, I was like, oh my god, I would stay as far away from this man as I possibly could.
Yeah, I don't know if I could. I don't know if I could deal either. At least
Right,
initially.
right. I was like, what? Like, no, like maybe I can work within your organization and even do some deals with you, but I would not want to be, in a position where I'm in your inner circle, and I don't need that. I don't want that. That's not the type of existence I want. But it worked for him, and by all accounts, from the people around him, they knew him and they understood it, and it was. I mean, they would talk about being mad, but I don't think anybody ever thought that he was malicious, right? Which I guess is some saving grace. I don't, he didn't. No one ever said he was a malicious person. It's just that depending on his mood and energy, he could be a little difficult at times.
Yeah, they said he had a famous temper.
Right, right, exactly. All right. So, we talked about the business deals. We talked about his personality. They talked about his upbringing. And then, towards the end of the book, it talked about his passing, So towards the end, he was a young guy. He was only 50, right? So, initially he started noticing he had health issues, or very tired than usual, and shortness of breath. And initially they thought it was because he's on the road all the time. This guy was catching all the flights, all the miles, trying to close all these deals. The schedule that they was describing in the book was very stressful, right? Like on a flight here, and then on another flight here in this country and that country, and lagging. So initially thought he was just working too hard, and then going to the doctor, we see that we found out that he had a brain tumor, and it was inoperable, and he didn't have that long to live. So then I think once he got that news and that information, I think there was a certain point of just processing, and then acceptance, right? And then they just talks about some of his last experiences and memories, and how he was preparing for his ultimately passing. But there was one part that felt kind of, I think for me it just made me sad, was when they found a quote unquote healer.
I had two feelings about it. It did have a air of desperation, right? It's like he's trying to do whatever he can to postpone his life, but it's also, I don't know if he really he didn't really necessarily believe in it, but he's like, well, what's it gonna hurt?
What's it gonna hurt?
Mentality, yeah.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. Like, I think for me initially, I was probably in the sense of it seemed like a desperation move, but then I also, why not? What else? Right? So it's like, is it really desperation? It's just like, well, I know I'm at the end anyway, so might as well see. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't know. I honestly can't call it. I will say for me, I look at it from the person personally. I grew up as a sick kid. I was a very sick kid. Listen. You want to talk about trying to find remedies when I was sick? Anything these doctors would recommend, we were trying. Right. Now I would not say I'm in the same boat as Lewis, because I was not, right? But just knowing to be in a sick situation and knowing that you're just trying to see what helps. And I didn't feel desperate. I just felt like, why not? What else? It can't be worse than what I'm already dealing with right now. So let's just see if this might help. All right. And there's a fine line, I would say, probably because I was a kid, maybe there wasn't that energy of desperation, because when you're young, you just feel invincible regardless. Even though you're a sick kid, you still feel invincible, right?
Right.
Now,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
but now as an adult, when you're dealing with this, you might not feel as invincible. So there might be that area of some desperation in there as well, right? But
Yeah, if I had made hundreds of millions of dollars, I would be trying to save my life at any cost too. So like, I'm not. Yeah, it's not a judgment thing as much as it's
right,
like trying
yeah.
to understand the perspective.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
for sure, definitely. There's no judgment on that part. It's like you understand all angles. It's like I could understand all aspects of that. And so yeah, and so then the book talks about him passing, and then all the prominent businessmen and politicians and things like that, and people who sent out their condolences and who he had impacted. And then talks about his foundation and his donation to Harvard Law School, and things like that. So yeah, and it ends on that and just talks about his impact, and that was the book for the most part. Yeah.
Yeah, that was it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think overall for me, it was a different type of business book, because I think with a lot of other business books, it's usually like, this is what you do, this is how you scale, this is boom, 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 this is how you get funding. And this was more of a book of saying, hey, this was showing us the life of someone who, didn't take that route, right? Like, he did a lot of things on his own, and it's a different type of business. His business was more of like leveraging and buying and acquiring and mergers and stuff like that, which I don't think a lot of people in our community even really think about or consider a lot of times, right? Which was refreshing to see. But it was also a autobiography, which I will say, for me, the autobiography part, especially early on, didn't really intrigue me, but I did understand why they kind of needed to lay that foundation as they told the other parts of his story.
Yeah, same. I that was the least the beginning was the least interesting. The first couple of chapters was the least interesting for me, but understand why we had it, and it did tee up all of the business deals really well, and his mentality in general. So
yeah. I mean, I knew I was gonna get to this book one day in life, just because all my OGs would recommend this book, so it has been on the list for a while to get to. So I'm glad I finally got to it.
Yeah, and then this came out when, in early 90s, mid 90s?
Early 90s.
Okay.
Early 90s. I think around 93 maybe. Yeah. Let me just double check while we're. Yeah, I think 93, 94. Yeah. So good read. If you just like, I would say I don't think if you're gonna read this book, don't expect to get like business insights and secrets, right? But I think it does give insight into like the type of personality and discipline and drive you may need to have in order to make a business very successful and grow, and to kind of see how a person can overcome a lot of obstacles that was thrown his way, especially early on in life.
Yeah, I mean, with the exception of some of the details when he discussed the Beatrice and the McCall deals, like, yeah, I agree with you. It's more of an overall overview of somebody who's really successful in business.
Indeed.
We can't go through this episode without me mentioning his jet that he bought and how he had the Dallas Cowboys colors, and that was very intentional on him. So as a Cowboys fan, I appreciated that too. But that's it.
Yo, Sean, I think you like this book more than you let on.
I know. I started off saying I didn't like it, but then there's all these gems.
Now you like shout out to Queens, Lewis Boulevard. Shout out to the private jet with the Cowboys. I think you was fronting in the beginning. All right. Well, that's a wrap then for this week's episode. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, thoughts around the book. Hopefully, it provided you with some value as you navigate through your business journey and personal life. As always, if you have a question you would like us to answer the show, shoot us a message on any of our social media channels, or shoot us an email at questions@businessgrindshow.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe and share on Spotify and iTunes. See you again soon. In the meantime, keep grinding.
The Business Grind is for entertainment purposes. Opinions expressed are those solely of the host and guests. Please consult with a professional and exercise discretion before engaging in any business endeavors.
I'm out here on the grind. I'm out here on the grind.